Hello and welcome to Comic Culture. I'm Terrence Dollard, a professor in the Department of Mass Communication at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. My guest today is illustrator and storyboard artist Vince Rodriguez. Vince, welcome to Comic Culture.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So Vince, comics and storyboards are related but they're not. So I was wondering if you could tell us what you do when you are working on storyboards.
Well, basically I have to lay out in comic book format pretty much what's going to happen throughout a commercial. But there's two phases. It depends if an agency calls me or if a director calls me. And even though they're both storyboarding in respect, the ones for the directors are called shooting boards. And what I do with those is that they're much simpler because it's basically a communication for the director to communicate with his staff. So he has the whole commercial laid out the way he wants to shoot it. And that way they can make adjustments accordingly if anything should come up. But he basically has the whole idea passed on to everybody that's working with. In the part where the agencies are being dealt with, the agencies have to communicate their idea to a client. So in that sense, I make a presentation of how the commercial will look in a finished sense of what they'll see in it. That way they can get feedback. So I prepare everything based either on what they describe to me, scene by scene, or if they give me a script. Sometimes the clients have enough confidence in my work where they just give me a script and I don't have to talk to anybody. I just put everything down, and then they give me feedback and changes are made, and away it goes. So that's pretty much the process that I go through.
When you're dealing with a script, and it is a client that you've worked with a lot, I guess there's a certain degree of freedom that you have in terms of visuals, but do you have to consider things like what the budget of the script is, or what the proposed shooting style is for a product when you're putting together the storyboards?
Not really. That's already been decided pretty much. I just have to put in the elements that are going to be seen in the shots, and that's pretty much about it. Sometimes the directors or the agencies, they ask me for advice on what should be done. Especially in the case of directors, because I wanted to be a movie director, but since I didn't go that route, I do have a lot of basic knowledge of shots, and I sometimes use cinematic shots, and I know some of the equipment and things that go on. So the directors can communicate with me a lot easier. Look, I want this kind of a shot. We're going to use a dolly here. We're going to use a crane here. So I take all those things into consideration. They told me they usually could communicate better with me in that respect than with some other artists that don't have knowledge about those things. So it's a little bit of an advantage. And I've worked with some directors from Hollywood too. I've worked with about, I'd say about 2 or 3 well-known directors. One of them being somebody who's well-known in the TV commercial field. But he also worked with Lucasfilms. His name is Steve Beck, and he directed Ghost Ship and 13 Ghosts. I don't know if you remember seeing those movies. But he also directed special effects on The Abyss, Indiana Jones. He was also art director in those. And I worked with the company that he was with at the time, which was Rhythm and Hughes. I also worked with one of the Hughes brothers, who was the director of The Book of Eli. But they hired them for TV commercials in those respects. So, I've had a pretty good roundabout in that aspect of the field.
It's interesting because
Go ahead.
when we're looking at commercials, it's very difficult. And my background is in television production. I've done a lot of advertisements, local commercials in the New York area, and it was always tough to try and work on what was essentially a small budget and try and put together a story that would look just as good as the commercials that they were able to spend millions of dollars on. So when you're dealing with 30 seconds, how many illustrations do you generally do for a 30-second spot, and how do you indicate the motion or any sort of movement that's going to be occurring in those storyboards?
The director pretty much, sometimes budget has a say in how many frames can be afforded. Other times the budget's open, and I've gotten into situations where I've had to draw about 125 frames for a particular commercial. and it's because the director wanted to do a whole bunch of things and maybe later pick from there what he needed to do. But the the general amount of frames that I do are about 20 to 30 frames per commercial, and it's rare that it goes beyond that. It's rare. So if it amounts to more than 20 frames, it's usually because they want to focus on certain details that are going to be in the commercial. And the way that I show things that are going to happen or motions, if it's in shooting boards, generally it's indicated with arrows. If they're going to do a dolly, there's going to be an arrow, pointing in the direction of the dolly. A zoom in would be 4 arrows going in towards the center or coming outward if it's going to be a zoom out. And with the agencies, they don't use those type of indications unless asked for, but that's been pretty rare.
And the tools that you're using, are you using traditional, pen and ink and pencil and boards, or are you using the digital tools?
I've been drawing since I was 3 years of age. I mean, I started getting more serious about the tools when I was about, I'd say in 10th grade. And I got into airbrushing and paints and all that stuff. So I've been using traditional all the way up into 2005. In the year 2005, I went completely digital because I saw it as way more efficient. I wanted to do it much before that, but I didn't have enough practice yet on the tablet. But I decided to sit down and focus really hard on that. And I managed to overcome it, fairly quickly, thankfully, because I really needed to implement it in my work, all the time. The best thing about that is the efficiency. My efficiency doubled or tripled because basically with the traditional, I'd have to not only draw it and then scan it, but then clean it up. And it's a whole process. So with this, I just draw it directly and it's ready to go. Unless they need me to color it, I'll color it also. And it's all ready to, it's been scanned. The look is a lot cleaner. I love it. It's been a step ahead for me since I did it. So, but I did traditional for a long time. I've been in Storyboard since '98, so I was using traditional since then.
As somebody who doesn't do much in the way of computer graphics, what sort of programs are you using? Because if I'm doing something, I might open up Photoshop, but I'm sure there have to be programs that are more art specific and that have a better workflow than trying to click with a mouse or something like that.
I've tried out a lot of different software since I started, getting into digital, which was I began, using the computer for scanning everything back in '95 to scan my work, and in '98 a lot more because I started storyboarding. But the tools that I boiled it down to is just two tools, which is one it's called Manga Studio, the one I'm using, but now it's called Clip Art Studio, and Photoshop. I boiled it down to those two. With those two, I pretty much handle everything perfectly and very efficiently. And I did study 3D for a while, but I didn't find it very necessary for myself.
And is this something where you're just strictly using the mouse, or are you using like a tablet and a stylus to do the art?
Well, the art is done with a stylus. I do it on a Wacom tablet. I recently purchased a small tablet where you can draw on screen, but I haven't gotten around to using it yet. And I'm still hooked on the tablet. I mean, I'm really fast with it, and it's just second nature pretty much. I barely know it's even there. I'm just looking at the screen and it's like controlling it with your mind, basically. I mean, I think any artist who uses it, there's a lot of artists now, they're using the Cintiq and other things like it, and that's fantastic. But I think I've gotten used to not seeing my hand in the way. I just like seeing the screen and the cursor moving about, and that's it. The other way, maybe that's why I've delayed a bit on using the tablet that I bought.
Now, is there any sort of lag? Because I can imagine if I'm drawing with a pen or a pencil, the line's going to be there right away, but sometimes with electronics, there's a little bit of a delay between your input and it showing up on the screen. Is there anything like that? And if so, how would you sort of work to adapt to that delay?
The delay I did notice on the tablet that I bought, and I've seen it on a lot of tablets. I mean, they're pretty responsive, but there's always a slight delay. With the tablet, I get no delay at all. So the tablet, that's probably another reason that I like the tablet so much, because the response is immediate. Whatever I do, especially when I did Photoshop, I started using for inking and drawing comic style or storyboarding with manga because the response was fantastic. In Photoshop, if I did, sometimes my my sketches are the way I throw lines are very violent. They're fast, and because in storyboarding you have to be fast. It's a very fast-paced uh, business, and Photoshop would give me kind of a like a blocky. If I do that, I get a blocky effect on the lines. With manga, it stays smooth and it right on the right on the money. It doesn't fail. So, yeah, as far as the tablet goes, I've had great results.
Now, you said you started storyboarding in 1998, and I'm imagining that that was sort of the beginning of the internet as we know it. So I'm wondering if you could explain a little bit of your interactions with clients then compared to now. And I'm imagining now you can just send something up to the cloud and they can download your artwork. But what were you doing then, and what were some of the changes that happened during your career?
As soon as I graduated from high school, I went directly into the field uh, because I had some friends of mine. The closest I would get to drawing comics would be doing T-shirt designs. So I started that, and there was a company that a friend of mine worked in, who he recommended me to the his boss, and it was they were one of the biggest companies in Florida that did T-shirts, and they did it for Disney and everything. So I started working freelance for them, and it went really well. But when I got into storyboards, I decided to make the change because a friend of mine called me. He was working for one of the major agencies down here. A friend of mine called Rick Corbin, and he told me he was an art director, and he called me, "Hey Vince, look, I want to do some storyboards." And so I kind of knew what they were, and I did them. And then from that point on, I just kept on doing them, and when people like your work, they start recommending you, and it started to branch out. But as far as the difference from then till now, I guess as far as the digital aspect, it was a little bit more cumbersome in the sense that you have to go meet with the client, then come back and work on everything, unless they wanted you to work over there. But I prefer to work in my studio. The digital aspect, you could just meet over the internet, just like we're doing now, if need be, and you save a lot of time. Also, as far as meeting clients, back then I'd have to call new clients up and sell myself, uh, and I managed to get that going along pretty well. So I've had to become not only the artist, but I had to be my own rep, and I also had to deal with the business side of it. So I had all that going on at the same time.
It's funny you mentioned that because a lot of artists don't like to think of the business side of promoting themselves. They think, well, I'm the artist, I should just draw. So what sort of tips can you share with the audience? You were mentioning before we started recording that you are trying to get back into comics as an artist. And I'm wondering if you could share some of the promotional tools that you've developed for yourself with our audience.
When I started with the storyboarding, since I had to communicate with a lot more people and agencies, I had to figure out a way to, because I was pretty much the same. I just wanted to stay home and draw and not deal with the business. But I figured, no, let me confront it. It was just something I wanted to do, I needed to do, so I can at least keep tabs on things myself. Because sometimes I figured, well, how well can you trust somebody that's doing something for you? And it just became second nature. I had to push myself. I had to sit down and think of what I was going to do. I developed a plan of overcoming the shyness of having to break the ice with people. And so I put that into practice by making phone calls. I'd open up the yellow pages back then and start calling agencies and practicing my dialogue that way until it started rough, but eventually it smoothed out, and I knew already what I was going to say. It's a matter of really knowing what you're going to say and having confidence in your work and what you're going to tell them. And so that developed, and from there on, I was able to pretty much work my way into any agency that I set my mind to, call them up, and I'd have an interview. So some friends of mine would tell me, "Oh, it's pretty difficult to get in with those people," and oh, give me the phone, and I call them up, and I got an interview in 2 days. So it really worked out well. It's a matter of putting yourself uh, into the aspect of getting that drive going where you push yourself. But I can understand the other side of the coin as well for artists where they don't want to deal with that, because it does become pretty hectic because you have to do a lot of running around.
And there's also a fine line between confidence and overconfidence. So when you're given criticism by an art director or a client, how do you develop the thick skin where it doesn't hurt you personally? It's more, you need to make the changes to your artwork.
That happened a lot after high school when clients would tell me something. Like any artist, I'd be, oh, well, and it would show in my face. That was the worst part. But I realized at some point, I go, okay, this is business. And what I do personally, I set it apart. So I divided the two. I go, this is going to be business. I don't care what they tell me. My goal is to give the client what they need. So that was my attitude. So when I focused on that, I was able to get over that, really well. The personal side, and even I've gotten so used to getting feedback and criticism that it doesn't bother me. After a time, and I tried to make it a priority to get over that hump as quickly as possible too, because the sooner you do it, the better it is for you. Now anybody can critique my work, say what they want. It doesn't faze me. I look at it as constructive. I mean, there are people who do it destructively, but that's a whole different issue. When we're talking about clients, then you want to listen to what they tell you, because there are things you don't see that they do. And so that for one, you got to deliver. They're paying you, so you have to deliver what they need. And this is about communication. So if you're going to be doing something like that, it's not worth getting personal about it. In fact, you should consider canceling it altogether. It's in your best interest. But it also helps your work. You start seeing things you didn't see before. So it has a very positive side to it.
I'm going to change gears a little bit because I'm looking in your studio and you've got a lot of great comic art on the walls. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your love of comics and how that sort of helped you develop your art career.
I got into comics back when I was 6 years old. I came across Corman's comic book, and I was leafing through the pages of Captain America. But I saw an ad for Sons of Origins of Marvel Comics, and I saw this orange character that called my attention. And I go, wait, who is this guy? He goes, that's the Thing. Oh, wow. So I remembered him. Then when I went to 7-Eleven, I saw the Fantastic Four on the rack, and I figured, well, I got to have this. And I didn't realize that I had picked up an issue with my all-time favorite artist, which is Jack Kirby. And from there on, I started seeing more of his work. I learned about him through another friend of mine. That he received a Kirby book, and he goes, you got to see this guy's work. And when I saw it, I was about 9 at that time. So there was a gap since that first comic book. And I go, I got to keep seeing more of this guy's work. And then when I realized what I had before, I go, look at that. So Kirby is the one that set me on the course for comic books. And I just devoured every page that Jack Kirby drew. I poured over it like there's no tomorrow. So that was my schooling at the beginning. Later came Richard Corman. I discovered him at a bookstore by mistake, and I was taken aback because I'd never seen a comic book done in that style of art. So that gave me a more three-dimensional aspect of looking at comics, because all I had ever seen was two-dimensional, John Buscema, Neil Adams, people like that in the overground comics. But then I learned about the undergrounds and Corbin's work. So that made me take up airbrushing and experimenting with different forms of material, on the comic-related work, which is what Corman led me to. I started drawing since I was 3, going back, because my dad used to like to draw. He would draw airplanes. So I'd always ask him, hey, draw me an airplane. So I'd watch him draw them. And then I lived in Cuba back then. I came back up over here at the age of about 5. Back then, we didn't have much paper. So I had to get an old paper bag, tear it open, and start drawing with a pen. So that's how I started. I kept drawing, and I loved it since. So I kept on drawing up until I was in high school. When I was in high school, I thought to myself, well, what am I going to do? Am I going to follow art, or am I going to get another kind of job? But I figured, well, this is a gift. I was born with this. I'm going to pursue it. And I stuck to it because I loved it. I go, I got to do what I love. I have it for a reason. And thankfully, it's paid off.
When we look at somebody like Jack Kirby, he's known for, I mean, his figure work isn't exactly, anatomically perfect or correct all the time, but his storytelling is amazing. And I'm wondering if that's something that sort of influenced your ability to tell a story in a storyboard.
Absolutely. From Jack, I picked up, even though his figures are not perfect, it makes no difference because it's the general idea of what's there. I mean, to me, it's like I would see what's beyond what he drew. He may have drawn what looks to be a simple cubistic style drawing, but I see something much more complex, probably what you would see in today's movies, like in a Thor movie or whatever, right? So that's what I would see through Jack's work. I know what Jack was trying to transmit through his work, at least to me. That's what I would get personally from him. And every book that I would see of his, I'd study his dynamics, his action, his method of communicating, which was came in very handy for my storyboard work and my comic book work, because I've learned through him to express a lot of things that help out in the storytelling process. And Corman is the same. Corman, if you look at his figures, they don't look anatomically correct, although they are, but they do have a kind of a look to them that seems like the upper body's a little bigger. And Corman is somebody I met. I talked to him over the phone, and great person. He's a fantastic person to speak to, very humble and amazing talent. But I learned a great deal from both of those artists. Those are probably the two main artists that influenced my work highly. I mean, there were other people like Barry Windsor Smith, John Buscema, and the like, which were also very helpful for me. But those two are the two that I can give most credit to.
So let's talk about the comics that you are working on. From what I understand, you're working on something now. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what it is and how you're sort of trying to get it out there for an audience.
Well, this is not the first comic I do. I've done like about 4 or 5 previous comics. This one is part of a horror anthology. It's for Cinescope Entertainment, and I'm just trying to see if I can get this, maybe hopefully through them, since they have a following, that I can hopefully maybe gain some traction or something, or begin to. If other people can see my work, hopefully something can come out of it. So I'm also, I get rusty when I sit down to draw comics because I don't do them very often, even though I do like to draw them. I can do stills, but as far as the sequentials come about, if you're not on it all the time, then it could be a little difficult at first, but I'm starting to get a little bit looser on it now. So yeah, it's hopefully this can be a platform for me to begin venturing into that. I hope.
And when you're working on a digital, I guess when you're using the tablet to create sequential art, is this something that allows you to work with the same layout, maybe tweak it a little bit, or is this something where it just makes it easy for you to cut and paste a panel that you like, but to start from scratch if the page doesn't work out the way you like it?
I can do all of the above. It doesn't matter. I start directly on a blank page digitally, and I do the frames on separate layers in case like in this, the editor gives me his feedback to make the appropriate changes, and I just grab the frame that I need to and make changes to it and leave it there, or cut and paste. Whatever is necessary to get it done.
And I see that we have just about 3 minutes or so left before we have to wrap up our conversation. So I'm just wondering if you had some advice, if I'm looking to go out and get started doing comics, but I want to work on a tablet or something like that. What would be some good entry-level things or some essential tools that I should have, or some books that I should pick up?
Well, as far as books, I'm not sure. Before I go any further, since there's such little time left, I didn't realize it. I'd like to thank Monty Friedman, who got us in contact for this interview. So I greatly appreciate that on his part, and I wanted to send that out to him. And as far as the recommendations, well, there's a lot you can find on the web as it is. As far as tools, well, find what's affordable for you, but yet that can be that can give you what you need. A lot of times is you either go with what's already known, or if you want to try, and also whether you want to work on a monitor or a tablet, or which one can you afford. But as far as books, I don't know what to tell you. I haven't bought any books as far as digital because I went straight to the web. To me, that's my university. I used to collect books a lot when I was using traditional. But as far as digital, yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there. You have to go and search in the bookstores, I guess, but nothing specific I can recommend on that end. But as far as the digital realm, get yourself a nice tablet, practice with it so you can master it, and or a monitor, which probably may be easier for most, that you can draw on, like a Cintiq or something equivalent that maybe is not as costly, but that you can work with. And that's my advice.
Well, thank you so much, Vince. We have run out of time. I'd like to thank you so much for being my guest today on Comic Culture. I'd like to thank you at home for watching the show. We hope to see you again soon.